We were just a few hours from Anchorage when the helicopter dropped us off in a clearing that looked more like a patch of wilderness swallowed by the mountains. There were 6 of us, 5 hunters and a guide. The cold Alaskan air bit at my face as we unloaded our gear, the wind carrying the sharp scent of pine and something else, something I couldn't quite place, but would later come to dread. Marcus was the first to crack a joke, as usual. "Come on, boys, we're hunting the damn boogeyman. Hope you packed your lucky socks." His laughter echoed off the towering trees. He was the loudest of our group, a New Yorker with too much money and not enough sense. The others, Dean, Kyle, Robert, and Luke, laughed along, brushing off the tension we all felt. I guess we didn't want to admit that this was different from the other hunts. We weren't after a lion or a rhino. This was something else. Our guide, a man named Bill, stood by in silence, his arms crossed over his chest. He wasn't laughing. He hadn't cracked a smile since we met him. He'd lived in Alaska his entire life, and the way he looked at the forest around us wasn't with awe. It was more like respect, maybe even fear. "You guys sure you want to go through with this?" he asked for what had to be the 5th time. He had asked us the same thing during the flight, and again when we signed his contract. But we were paying him a fortune to lead us, and no one had come all this way to back out now. "Relax, Bill," I said, trying to ease the tension. "We've hunted worse. We'll be fine." He just shook his head. "This ain't like anything you've hunted before." Bill was right. We knew that. But money and arrogance had brought us here, and no one was going to turn down the chance to be part of the first group to bring in a Bigfoot. For $100,000 each, we were promised the thrill of a lifetime, and the bragging rights that would come with bagging the legendary creature. The stories said it lived in the deep wilderness, untouched by civilization, where the air grew thinner and the trees swallowed all sound. Perfect for an elusive predator. We geared up and set out, following Bill into the dense forest. The farther we went, the quieter it became. I couldn't even hear the wind anymore, just the soft crunch of our boots on the forest floor. It felt like the trees were closing in around us, the sunlight barely breaking through the thick canopy. "Place gives me the creeps," Dean muttered, scanning the woods as if he expected something to leap out at us at any moment. He wasn't alone. There was an uneasy energy among us, a tension we tried to shake off with jokes or the occasional comment, but it lingered, settling into our bones. Bill led the way, barely saying a word as we trudged deeper into the forest. He had warned us that the hunt would be long and grueling, that we might not see any signs of the creature for days, if at all. But that wasn't why we were on edge. It was the feeling of being watched. I brushed it off at first. We all did. Maybe it was just the isolation, the vast emptiness of the wilderness that played tricks on your mind. But as the hours stretched on, it became harder to ignore. Every so often I'd catch movement in the corner of my eye, just a shadow flitting between the trees, too quick to make out. When I'd turn to look, there'd be nothing there. "Anyone else feel that?" Robert asked, his voice quieter than usual. He was the youngest of our group, just shy of 30, and eager to prove himself. Luke, the eldest and the most experienced hunter, scoffed. "It's just your imagination, kid. We're in the wild. Animals are always watching." But even he didn't sound entirely convinced. That night, we set up camp near a riverbank. Bill told us we were making good time, that if we stayed on course, we might come across tracks by morning. We sat around the fire, our laughter fading into the crackle of the flames as the darkness pressed in around us. The feeling of being watched hadn't gone away. I volunteered for the first watch, mostly because I wanted to shake the unease that had settled into my gut. As the others slept, I sat by the fire, rifle across my lap, my eyes scanning the tree line. The moon was barely a sliver, offering little light, and the forest beyond our camp seemed to swallow everything in shadow. An hour passed, maybe 2, and then I heard it, something moving in the trees, a faint rustle, too deliberate to be the wind. I stood, gripping my rifle, my pulse quickening. The sound stopped, but the hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I knew something was out there, just beyond the fire's light. I didn't wake the others. Maybe I should have. But I told myself it was nothing, just a deer or a bear passing through. I stayed alert for the rest of my watch, though, listening, waiting. but nothing else happened. In the morning, we packed up and continued our trek. The forest seemed quieter than before, the air heavy with an unspoken tension. Bill was the first to notice the tracks. He crouched low, examining the large, deep imprints in the soft earth. They were unlike any animal tracks I'd ever seen, bigger than a man's foot, with a distinct, elongated shape. "That's it," Bill said, his voice grim. "That's what you're looking for." We followed the tracks, our excitement growing despite the unease that clung to us. The hunt was on, but as we pressed deeper into the forest, the feeling of being hunted became impossible to ignore. It started with small things. Traps we'd set the night before were triggered, but whatever had sprung them was long gone. Supplies disappeared from our packs when we weren't looking. At first, we chalked it up to the wilderness messing with us, but the incidents grew stranger, more deliberate. Kyle was the first to disappear. One moment he was with us, walking at the rear of the group, and the next, he was gone. We didn't even hear him scream. We searched for hours, calling his name, scouring the area, but there was no sign of him. No tracks, no struggle, just gone. Bill didn't say much, but I saw the way his hand hovered near his rifle, the way his eyes scanned the trees like he was expecting something to come for us next. We made camp early that night, no one willing to venture farther without Kyle. The atmosphere was tense, fear gnawing at the edges of our resolve. No one joked anymore. That night, it was Marcus who vanished. I had taken second watch, my eyes heavy with exhaustion. The fire had burned low, casting flickering shadows over the camp. Marcus had been on the far side, wrapped in his sleeping bag, snoring lightly. I blinked, and when I looked again, his sleeping bag was empty. I scrambled to my feet, calling his name, waking the others. Bill was the first to reach Marcus's spot, and his face went pale as he knelt beside the bag. Blood. Not a lot, but enough to know that something had taken him. Something quick. Something quiet. "We need to get out of here," Robert said, his voice trembling. "We're not hunting it. It's hunting us." Bill didn't argue. We broke camp at first light, abandoning most of our gear in our haste to leave. The tracks were still there, leading deeper into the forest, but none of us wanted to follow them anymore. The hunt was over. Now, it was just about surviving. But the forest had other plans. As we hurried through the dense trees, the sense of being watched became unbearable. I could hear something moving with us, staying just out of sight, tracking us. No matter how fast we moved, it was always there, pacing us. Dean was the next to go. He'd been at the front of the group, urging us to move faster. One moment, he was there, pushing through the undergrowth, and then there was a snap, a trap. His scream tore through the forest as the metal jaws clamped around his leg, pulling him to the ground. We rushed to help, but before we could reach him, something moved in the trees. A blur of shadow, a low growl. Dean's eyes went wide with terror. And then he was gone, dragged into the forest, his screams cut short by the sound of snapping bone. The rest of us ran. I don't know how long we ran, crashing through the forest like panicked animals, but by the time we stopped, we were down to 3, me, Robert, and Bill. "We're dead," Robert muttered, his face pale, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "It's picking us off, one by one." Bill didn't say anything. He just checked his rifle and motioned for us to keep moving. But it didn't matter. No matter how fast we ran, no matter how far we went, it was still there, stalking us. We stumbled into a clearing, and for a moment, I thought we'd made it. The trees opened up, revealing a stretch of open ground, a river in the distance. But then I saw them, the bodies. Kyle, Marcus, Dean. They were laid out in a grotesque display, their limbs twisted at unnatural angles, their eyes wide open in terror. Robert screamed. That's when I saw it. It stepped out of the trees, towering over us, its eyes burning with a cold, calculating intelligence. This wasn't an animal. It was something else, something ancient and dangerous, and it had been toying with us from the start. Bill fired his rifle, but it didn't flinch. It moved too fast, a blur of motion, and then Bill was on the ground, his neck twisted at an unnatural angle. I didn't wait to see what it would do next. I ran, the sounds of Robert's screams fading behind me as I crashed through the trees, not caring where I was going, only that I had to get away. I don't remember how long I ran or how I found the road. The next thing I knew, I was stumbling into the arms of a search party, my clothes torn, my body bruised and battered. They asked me what happened, but I couldn't tell them. Because how do you explain that you were hunted by something that shouldn't exist? That something had turned the tables on you? That you had become the prey? They never found the others. The official report said they were lost to the wilderness, victims of a tragic hunting accident. But I know the truth. I see it every time I close my eyes. It's still out there, waiting, watching, and I'll never go into the woods again.